I'm Hallie Jackson in Washington. We are coming on the air following the latest developments out of Minnesota after that ICE-involved shooting in that state. Governor Tim Walz speaking now. Let's listen in.
And other things being done. I would encourage Minnesotans and folks across the country in this moment. You're seeing neighborliness and kindness rise to the occasion. Is go and find out what they're doing there and give some help if you can. I'd also say last night we saw Minnesotans meet the moment once again. Thousands of Minnesotans demonstrated last night peacefully. They shared a message about the reckless ICE mobilization is not keeping us safe and led to the tragedy that the world witnessed once again. To Minnesota, I say thank you. There's strength in numbers, there's power in peace, and what we saw was a beautiful vigil to a life that we're starting to learn more about. And I will let those that want to push out false narratives, to slander or defame Renee Good, Minnesotans will tell her life story. Minnesotans will be there to defend her honor and see this as a human being, not a moment in time or the callous casualness that I've watched some people on TV gloss over what they saw. We've also spent a lot of time talking the last 24 hours about accountability. That means no function of government operates with impunity. It means when someone's in a position of authority and they commit any act that impacts our people, there has to be another place to turn to get justice. Checks and balances. Basic idea, the center of the formation of our country. It's the only measure that protects us from the abuse of government or federal overreach or tyrannical government. Yesterday, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, spent the day yesterday attempting to get that accountability. We have learned that the Trump administration has now denied the state that ability to participate in the investigation. And I just want to make this as clear as possible to everyone. Minnesota must be part of this investigation. These are nonpartisan career professionals that have spent years building the trust of the community. There's a BCA Force Investigations Unit that was created by the legislature, by the people of Minnesota, to provide an independent, consistent, and trusted mechanism for investigating the use of force incidents involving law enforcement officers. Minnesota has seen our share of these. And what you've seen is, and I have witnessed it during my time, that these professionals have risen to the moment. They are trusted by people. People who are not by inclination trusting of law enforcement or government have come to see the professionals at the BCA as true arbitrators that can get them justice. The unit is the result of years of scrutiny, public engagement, and bipartisan legislative action. Minnesotans have made it clear time and again they expect transparency through this process where a police officer uses deadly force. The BCA Commissioner, Superintendent Evans, have earned that trust by delivering on that expectation. I think it's clear to everyone as they saw this that it feels now that Minnesota has been taken out of the investigation. It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false, verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even don't know. They've determined that the actions are done. I don't know. I've not used inflammatory terms of what happened. I've asked us to find the answers. The only way we find the answers is a thorough investigation by nonpartisan professionals. We've delivered that. We've been able to do it. We've earned the trust. And when I say that, the trust of BCA, and I tell Minnesotans the trust of law enforcement here. Everyone knows, globally, certainly here, that George Floyd, who was murdered a few blocks from this site, tore at the soul of who we were. But we healed. We built back trust. Chief Brian O'Hara came in and took one of the most difficult jobs in America of building back trust in the police force in Minneapolis after Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And he's earned that. And he's level. And he's fair. And he's asking for that. And so, Minnesotans, I will continue to press that we be part of the investigation, that we do the investigation, so that Minnesotans can trust what the outcome is. I don't have a predetermined notion. Yes, I saw the video. Yes, I saw that. But a thorough investigation will see what happened before that. It will take all factors in, and it will come up with a fair and just conclusion. And we will accept that. Very, very difficult for Minnesotans to think in any way this is going to be fair when Kristi Noem was judge, jury, and basically executioner yesterday. That's very, very difficult to think that they were going to be fair. With that being said, Minnesotans, we've risen to the occasion so far, but it's going to get challenging. It's going to be challenging because I feel your anger. The human desire to lash out in this moment is very real. I can tell you that that is the wish of many people, that they fulfill the wish they want to see us turn on one another, turn towards violence rather than peaceful reconciliation, rather than peaceful civil disobedience. And we have to do our best to not play into that. I say this too when I saw yesterday some of the anger, whether it's Minneapolis Police, Minnesota State Patrol, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Minnesota National Guard. They are there to protect and serve, as it said. They are there to protect Minnesotans. Throwing your anger at them only inflames this situation. And I know some of you were up at the Whipple building this morning, and to the press who are here, I saw some of this myself. Thank you. Continue to have access to every single space. Continue to cover this story. Continue to show the world what's out there. I will say it where our president won't. The press are the defenders of our democracy. You need to be there. But I also tell folks, protect our Minnesotans who are out there and don't turn the anger to them. This is a brazen use of force. They want us to bend the knee. They want us to capitulate. The way we give them what they want is allow them to use this as an excuse to put more troops on the ground. Use them as an excuse to show that these are violent protests. And I also witnessed what I think is going to be a pattern over the next few days and the coming hours, is I saw an individual show up there with the intent to antagonize folks who were peacefully protesting, with a bullhorn to scream at them. And again, the desire to move on that individual is exactly what they want, because our respect for the First Amendment means we will expect and respect all opinions. If this individual is there expressing support for ICE, that's their constitutional right to do so, and they need to be protected. Don't allow that to be a catalyst to create violence. We believe in states' rights. We believe the federal government needs to stay out of this. We believe that the situation has gotten worse and less safe because of their presence. And I will just say there were two incidents yesterday I saw after this that just tore at my soul. I saw an individual at the scene identify themselves as medical personnel, a physician, and asked to provide aid, and an ICE agent said, "I do not care." That lack of humanity was chilling to me. And after this incident happened, and after the tensions rose, ICE agents entered a Minnesota school, causing disruptions at that school. I can't say this strongly enough as governor, as a parent, as a teacher. To our elected representatives, Democrats and Republicans, I beg you, I implore you to tell them to stay out of our schools. This tragedy will be magnified 100-fold if this fight moves into the hallways of our public schools amongst our youth. And they're watching us. They're watching us now, how we respond. So I've got a few simple asks. Let us, the professionals, handle this on Minnesota soil, this investigation. De-escalate this situation by removing yourselves from this situation with these 2,000 agents that were put here. And above all else, stay out of our schools. I'd like to ask you to care, but that might be a step too far for some people. But I know Minnesotans care. So we'll protest peacefully. We will win in courts. We will certainly win in the defense of our democracy because the American people see what's happening here. But the way that we don't win and the way that we lose, if this turns towards violence and allows them to escalate. It cannot happen. So I ask the grass top leaders out there, the faith leaders, the folks who are on the streets, and in many times the true leaders are not the elected officials. They're the folks on the ground. I beg you, implore you, follow those words of the leaders we've had. I had the privilege of serving with John Lewis, and John talked about good trouble. I'm not telling you not to find good trouble, but I asked John many times, I said, John, I don't know if I'd have your self-restraint. Didn't you want to lash out? He said, yes, daily. But he said, I wanted to win this. I wanted to do what right, and I wanted justice to prevail. And to do that, I knew the only way was to not lash out, to not give in to that. So to each and every one of you, we're not going to win this through violence. We're going to win it through justice. We're going to win it through compassion. We're going to win it through Minnesota Nice, and we're going to win it by holding every one of these people accountable as they should for what we've seen on the streets of Minneapolis. With that, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Jacobson to give you a situation update.
Thank you, Governor. Again, I'm Bob Jacobson, and it is my honor to serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety. First of all, again, I want to express my sincere condolences to the loved ones of Renee Nicole Good. Someone has lost their life, and that is not something that anyone takes lightly. Minnesotans came out yesterday to express their grief, their frustration, and their anger at this terrible tragedy. I expect that they will continue to come out today. And I want to thank everyone who demonstrated peacefully. This helped honor Renee's memory and gave her family space to mourn. Minnesota's residents and visitors have the right to demonstrate and to exercise their First Amendment rights. I want to remind everyone that there are safe ways to do so. Our goal is to reduce tensions, to avoid conflict, and to maintain a calm environment. And as I mentioned yesterday, we recommend the following safe and lawful ways to demonstrate. Please get together peacefully with others in public areas where pedestrians are allowed. March or walk together in pedestrian areas, please, not on the roadways. Make your voice heard through chants, speeches, and displaying signs. There are a few things I just want to mention very quickly that are unsafe. Because as always, our top priority is public safety, and we cannot allow behaviors that create hazards, threaten public safety, or disrupt emergency services or endanger people nearby. That would include certainly demonstrating on the freeway, walking on highways, throwing objects, setting things on fire, property damage, graffiti, fireworks, illegal weapons, reckless and dangerous driving, or assaultive or aggressive behavior. I know that we all want more definitive answers about that fatal shooting that occurred yesterday. And as we are able to get those answers and dispel rumors and false information, then we can rightfully honor Renee's memory and help her family, loved ones, and our community heal. With that, I'll turn it back to Governor Walz and maybe a few questions.
Please. Esme? I have not. As I said yesterday, I did speak to Secretary Noem and received a lot of talking points. I will note that I asked Secretary Noem how she would have felt if President Biden had sent 2,000 troops into Rapid City, South Dakota, and she said she would have welcomed them. I leave that for the folks of South Dakota to determine. I've not spoken to the president. I would ask him, first of all, the goal here is to make America safe, is what he said. There is no verifiable evidence that any of this is making America safer. I would ask him to de-escalate in the moment, to allow Minnesotans to back up and grieve, to allow this investigation to be played out by the rule of law. I said it again, I have not passed any judgment on this. And to please please, whatever it is, leave Minnesota alone. Earlier this week, I don't know if it was if something he wanted or I've already made it clear. I'm exiting the stage here in a year. But I told him I have a year to continue to do what I love dearly and what I believe I've been good at, making Minnesota a better place to live. The number of calls we got today of parents asking if they should send their kids to school or not. Minneapolis had to make what I believe was the absolute correct decision to cancel school. We have students out of learning today. I would just ask him, I'm not talking anything about border security. I'm not talking anything about what he needs to do on that. None of this is accomplishing either his mission or making us any safer. So just give us a pause. Let us breathe. Look, we're exhausted. We're exhausted as Minnesotans. We're exhausted as Americans. And this relentless assault on Minnesota, for whatever reason, is just cruel now. It has reached cruelness. So please, just give us a break. And if it's me, you're already getting what you want. But leave my people alone. Leave our state alone. And look again and see what's happening. It's not me saying it. You're hearing it from many, many others. So that's what I would say.
Governor Walz and Commissioner Jacobson, is there anything stopping state and local law enforcement from conducting an independent investigation into this, even if the federal government does not want to have you have a joint investigation?
So, great question. We have asked for cooperation from the federal government. We were invited in to do a joint investigation on this initially. We continue to work with the federal government all the time on joint investigations. This is not something new, whether it be with the FBI or other federal law enforcement agencies, so we are accustomed to doing joint investigations. As the governor has mentioned, our Force Investigative Unit within the BCA has a stellar reputation for doing quality investigations, for finding the answers to the questions that people have. There are so many questions out there that I know the public has from watching what's been shown on social media and regular media. And the goal for me would be to provide an investigation, preferably in tandem with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because we work with them all the time, and they are they do have all the evidence and the original investigative notes and reports. We have none of that. They have shared none of that with us. We would welcome the opportunity to jump back in, to do that investigation, use our high-quality investigators from the BCA to be able to do that with them, to find the answers that the public deserves. Without any of that information, or without any of that assistance from the FBI or the federal government, we would be at a loss to be able to initiate and conduct a thorough investigation. For us to be able to do that, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, without cooperation from the federal government.
How difficult would it be to file state charges without the cooperation of the FBI?
To be able to file state charges, we would need, again, a full investigation, which would include the opportunity to have been at the crime scene, to have had the opportunity to take a look at all the video and evidence that the FBI would have in their possession. I don't make any prejudgments about what happened yesterday. We can all see what we want to see on the videos and what we have seen in the media. That doesn't mean none of us, I will not, as a public safety professional, jump to any conclusions as to who is at fault in this. What I will say, though, is that unless we do that thorough investigation, unless we have access to all of that evidence, unless we have access to the agents that were involved in that, to any witnesses, without any of that, we would not be able to put together a quality investigation for any prosecutor to be able to make a determination as to whether or not someone should be charged with a crime.
I'm going to note on this, too, that no one less than Tom Homan yesterday said it would be unprofessional to pass judgment ahead of time. Now, the disconnect between what Tom Homan said and Kristi Noem said needs to be rectified by the federal government. I will note, too, this is a question I asked, not being an attorney of my team, and it will go to the family, that there will certainly be civil cases filed on this, and those will be filed in Minnesota court and be held in court. Corn?
What is standard operating procedure when a federal agent of any kind in Minnesota shot and killed somebody, a civilian, are you usually involved? Is there usually a joint investigation?
Generally, if there is any investigation involving use by a federal officer, generally the federal government, federal officials will lead that investigation. We have participated in numerous investigations in the past. It is very infrequent where there's a use of force by law enforcement officer, federal law enforcement officer, but we have worked jointly and shared information in previous investigations.
I'd like to say, I'm gonna add on this and say, if you truly wanted to de-escalate this situation, the logical conclusion would be to follow that procedure and allow Minnesota to participate. And that's where we started yesterday, and it's one of the reasons I came out here, and I'm not going to criticize that because that was the proper process, and I'm going to have to talk to Minnesotans to try, and it's a very difficult task. I think we all know what can happen here, to calmly wait until all the facts come out. I think you in this room are seeing the gravity of this situation by not allowing Minnesota to participate, and the prejudgment that's already been made by leadership creates a very, very dangerous situation. And that's why, once again, I'm going to reiterate to our federal partners, simply let us be part of this. Use our professional folks. They will gain you the credibility and the trust of Minnesotans to believe the work that you're doing is honest, and it's not just a whitewash to backfill a predeceived notion. All right, so I got 10.
Is there anything that the state can do to put in additional protection around schools or to allow for additional e-learning days for these situations?
Yeah, it's interesting, Dana, that you would ask that. We were just, as we were coming in here discussing, someone asked about that, and they mentioned Ruby Bridges, and the Little Rock folks, about escorting people in. We have not determined that yet, but it is a situation that we're going to have to explore. As I said, again, the thing that cut me deeply was watching what happened in our schools and the chaos. And I was on with Commissioner Jett this morning as he's talking to folks from St. Cloud to Duluth about what they think about today. Should we be in classes today and tomorrow in those schools, or does it pose a potential risk? And so we're trying to figure that out. I think many of the things and the lessons we learned during COVID is local communities and local schools being able to make some of these decisions in the long run probably gets us better outcomes, but we are deeply concerned with that. I'm going to come back as soon as we get any more information from all of you. We'll be in front of you again. I will reiterate, and many of you know my wife, Gwen, the First Lady, is an English and literature teacher, and we were talking about some of this, and she got asked the question, and it was when will all of this end? And what Gwen said, it will end when enough people say it will end. And I think that is sage advice. And then I couldn't help but thinking, and it scares me a little bit, I heard those words. We remembered, many of us in here in sophomore, when we read it, that the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most important directive. It certainly feels like that in this moment. And so I want Minnesotans to not believe that I'm telling you not to be angry, not to be scared, not to be feeling a little bit hopeless in this moment. But I would also say this, and I saw it last night, I saw it during George Floyd, I've seen it throughout our history. When things looked really bleak, it was Minnesota's first that held that line for the nation on that July 3rd, 1863. And I think now we may be in that moment that the nation's looking to us to hold the line on democracy, to hold the line on decency, to hold the line on accountability, and more than that, to rise up as neighbors and simply say, we can look out for one another. We can have differences. But we've proved to the world going on 250 years that our democracy could hold. It feels to me like we're at one of those inflection points, that simply asking our government to give us accountability, listen to local leaders, ratchet down the rhetoric, let people feel safe in their person, and let's let our kids go to school without fear. Let's let our kids go to school knowing that tomorrow could be a little better day. And so we're going to work on that. I'll leave you with this, and I'm not sure when we'll get in front of you next, but to Minnesotans, again, just one last time, don't give them what they want. Don't give them the unrest that they want. Don't give in to allowing them to bring more folks in here. Don't allow them to expand this somewhere else. Rise up, wrap your arms around your neighbors, peacefully express your First Amendment and your constitutional rights, and let's start healing, get some answers, and move Minnesota forward. Thank you.
You have been listening to Governor Walz there in the state of Minnesota speaking after a 37-year-old woman was killed in that ICE-involved shooting just about 24 hours ago. You heard the governor there lay out his concerns about the investigation now being led by the FBI moving forward, saying that the state has now been cut out of any cooperation or involvement in that investigation into this shooting that has triggered, as you're seeing here, widespread demonstrations across the state of Minnesota. That's a live shot there from the air in Minneapolis. We've seen vigils throughout the course of the last 18 or 20 hours as well. I want to get to our Stephen Romo, who is there on the ground. He is near the shooting scene in Minneapolis. And Stephen, you heard the governor talk about his concerns for kids in school, with obviously Minneapolis having called off school today, he says, and then the situation on the ground, continued calls for calm. The governor says Minnesotans have met the moment, but he is clearly frustrated, invoking Orwell in these remarks and more.
Yeah, he certainly has. And some of what we heard from Governor Walz, I've heard echoed from people out in Minneapolis today. The idea that the Trump administration has seemed to already have decided what happened before an investigation was complete. We heard that frustration from Governor Walz, and people here protesting as well, that they've seen that video or these different angles of the video and have already come to a conclusion. And that has sparked a lot of frustration. We've heard different messages from local leaders that we have from federal leaders. Clearly, we heard Governor Walz say that Kristi Noem was basically judge, jury, and executioner yesterday. Some very strong words there. And that same sentiments being echoed here. Protesters, as Governor Walz has asked for, have remained calm. They're chanting right now. They have continued to chant, but things have been fairly peaceful in the neighborhood where it's happened. But we know there are more protests to come. Hallie?
Stephen Romo, thank you very much for that. I want to get right to our Julia Ainsley, our senior Homeland Security correspondent. And Julia, I understand you have new reporting now on the officer who fired the gun.
That's right. So we don't have the name of the officer yet, but I have been told to look at, and I have in front of me now, details of an incident that the DHS is now saying this officer was involved in June. It was also in Minnesota. It was in Bloomington, Minnesota, when ICE was targeting someone who they said was a convicted sex offender. They were going after this man. This officer, the same officer who fired the shots in this incident yesterday, broke the back window of the car of the target of this man, and then the man went into drive and dragged this officer more than 50 yards. And so this person was later brought up on those charges, and we have the charges. We're going through them now, Hallie. This just came in, so still getting more details. But this, of course, is what Kristi Noem was referencing in her press conference, where she says that this officer previously had an incident involving a vehicle. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily justify or excuse or explain why his behavior may have been to pull the trigger in the position yesterday, but it does inform what that officer's experience was. It also tells us he's operated in Minnesota in the past. This could be his local area of jurisdiction. As we know, they brought in 2,000 officers from field offices around the country just this Sunday. But based on the fact he was operating in Minnesota in June, this may be his jurisdiction. We also know he's experienced. He's not part of the surge that ICE has done just in the last 6 months to bring in 10,000 new officers when they cut a lot of the mandatory training back. They went from a 13-week program to a 6 to 8 week program. This is someone who's been with ICE for a long time, but he was previously dragged more than 50 yards just in June of last year, Hallie.
And this is, again, you make the point, Julia, hang with me for a second here, that Secretary Noem had referenced this. She talked about, in fact, what she has described as a surge in what she described as vehicle rammings or these vehicle-involved incidents with demonstrators, protesters gathering near the site of some of these ICE operations. Let me ask you this, and I know you're still looking through the charges, so if you don't know the answer, just let me know. The individual who was behind the wheel in that June incident, Julia, was that person charged with domestic terrorism? That was something that came up frequently over the course of the last day.
That is a great question, Hallie, and when we find out, I will let you know. It does seem that he was charged at least with assault of a federal officer, but that's a great question to be asking. And again, when Noam talks about how this has increased, these incidents of assaults on officers involving vehicles, there's also been an increase in ICE officers approaching people in vehicles, especially people who are U.S. citizens, people who are in traffic stops. We see traffic stops in cities across the country now where ICE is now checking IDs of people who were just on their way to work. So there are more ICE operations involving vehicles than we previously saw in other administrations.
Julie, I'm going to let you go back to looking through those documents, talking with your sources. Come back. I know you're staying at your camera. Let me just tell people what we're seeing on the left side of our screen as we bring in Tom Winter, who I want to talk to in a second here. This is one of the demonstrations that we have seen pop up over the course of the last day, including overnight. We've seen vigils. We've seen singing. In this instance, it's a gathering of people. This is a live shot here. Again, you're looking live at this from our station in Minneapolis, CARE, their helicopter now above the scene. And you can see people, some of them holding signs there. Let me bring in Tom now, because, Tom, one of the things that you heard from both the governor, the head of public safety in Minnesota, was immense frustration that they are not a part of, that they are, in their words, being, in their view, being cut out of this federal investigation led by the FBI into this officer-involved shooting. Now, the Minnesota officials say that that is not the norm when this has happened in the past. Can you give us a reality check on that?
Yeah, sure, Hallie. So Governor Tim Walz saying Minnesota must be part of the investigation. That's a quote. As far as in the past, I have seen several instances where state investigators or a local state prosecutor has been involved in a federal investigation. One I covered quite extensively approximately 10 years ago was an offshoot of the Boston Marathon bombing investigation involving a fatal use of force by a member of law enforcement. And in that instance, it was actually an FBI agent that was involved. And state prosecutors, and because of the different rules that different agencies have, were actually able to publish quite a comprehensive public report that put to rest some of the rumors and misinformation that might have been out there at the time, provided some answers to some questions. And that's something that it is possible that we could have had here had the state investigators been involved. It is also possible, and this is a statement that the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Minnesota, kind of the statewide investigative body that has a what is referred to in law enforcement circles as a shooting team, basically a team that investigates solely officer-involved shooting incidents, this being one of them. In those particular instances, Hallie, they can get the file after it's done in order to look at it to see if a prosecution could come up. Now, one of the challenges that they have now is that if they're not in on this part of the investigation, they could go out and interview everybody in that neighborhood. They could go door to door, ask for evidence, ask for video evidence. But in order to conduct a complete investigation, they really need the vehicle, they need the ballistics, and they need other information and perhaps statements from some of the ICE officers that were there on the scene or other ICE agents. And if they don't have that, they really can't conduct a comprehensive investigation. So that's what they're referring to there. Minnesota law is different than the federal guidelines for DHS when it comes to deadly use of force. There's a word, reasonable, which is included in the DHS deadly use of force. It is different in Minnesota. It's a little bit stricter. So that could be something that comes into play. I think this is going to be really a test for the Minneapolis FBI office in the course of this investigation. It is one of the largest by geography field offices of the FBI in the country. So they're going to have to take a hard look at this as far as the information that comes up in the course of their investigation. And then Hallie, will we see the results of that investigation? It remains an open question at this hour.
Tom, as you've been speaking, we're showing not just on the left side of your screen that demonstration, and I want to be clear where that is. You see those flowers that have been assembled there near either, I think it's a lamppost or a tree. That is near the scene of the shooting. On the right side of your screen, that's the White House briefing room, and that is because any minute now, we expected it to start at 1 p.m., we should hear from the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt and Vice President J.D. Vance. Leavitt said that Vance will be joining her for this briefing at 1. So, again, any minute we expect that to begin. We've got our team, our White House team, in the room for that. Julie, I want to go back to you here and picking up on something Tom referenced and that the governor talked about rather extensively, this issue of what happens at schools here. The governor, in answer to a question that was kind of tough to hear, that I assume was about the possibility of escorting kids to schools, referenced Ruby Bridges, of course, escorted by the National Guard decades ago. This question around kids heading to school, their safety, the governor was very clear he doesn't want ICE in schools. And that's coming after word of another operation near a school after this ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis yesterday.
And I want to get back to you also, Hallie, on your question previously. The man who dragged this officer yesterday, now we're hearing more than 100 yards, swerving around to try to shake him off, was charged with assault of a federal officer, not domestic terrorism. That was a good question. Wanted to get you that answer. What you asked about the schools is the same question I asked Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons just before the school year started. This was when ICE was very prevalent in D.C. I told him I have a kindergartner starting at school that day. Is there anything you can say to guarantee that ICE will not go into public schools in D.C. or around the country? And he could not give me a straight answer. What he said is that they reserve going into schools in times if they are basically targeting someone, that they're not going to do sweeps inside of schools. That doesn't mean they won't arrest parents dropping off children. We saw that in May in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've seen it outside schools in Los Angeles and in Chicago. And we also know that there have been teachers, daycare workers who have been arrested in there. There was a daycare worker arrested in her place of work. So it's not that schools have been obsolete. And just as soon as this administration took place a little over a year ago, Hallie, they rescinded a memo that previously prohibited ICE from going into schools, places of worship, and hospitals known as sensitive locations, and said that basically they could now go in there if they needed to. Lyons was clear, though, that they aren't doing sweeps like they would do in a neighborhood or a Home Depot parking lot in a school, trying to assure them that schools are still considered safe places. He also said that sometimes they need to go into schools if there is a child that crossed the border unaccompanied and they have since been unaccounted for once they've been placed with a U.S. sponsor. He said that's really much more of a welfare check and something that he very much deeply felt that ICE did need to have the right to do, to go into schools to check on the whereabouts of those children that may have fallen off the radar of U.S. officials who were trying to check in on their welfare. But as far as schools go, this is a big reason why we see a lot of community activism around schools. People will often wait by bus stops. We see brigades of parents who are taking children to school if the parents are not feeling comfortable leaving their own home to take their kids to school. And that is exactly what we were told was happening just yesterday in Minneapolis before this incident took place, that they were nearby a school and you heard those whistles. People were trying to alert people in the area and people who might be going to school that ICE was around, Hallie.
Julia, stay with us here as we're staying in our live coverage. And I want to remind folks at any minute we expect to see Vice President Vance take to the microphone there at the White House inside the briefing room. Kind of unexpected, candidly. We heard this morning that he would be showing up and speaking. He has been active, of course, online, talking about this, defending the administration and specifically the ICE agents' response in Minneapolis. And as we talk, I want to bring back in Tom Winter, too, because, Tom, Secretary Noem also defended the way that this investigation is proceeding. And she has said that she is frustrated with the way that Minnesota, she says, and officials in Minneapolis have not been cooperative with some of these ICE operations, including this most recent search.
That's right. That's something that the Department of Homeland Security has questions and complaints about in a number of cities, not exclusive to Minneapolis, New York being one of them. There was a question that came up in the course of that press conference, Hallie, that I thought was quite interesting. He's a competitor of mine, but I thought it was really sharp. And it's a question I've had, which is, will the Department of Homeland Security review the publicity that surrounds their actions in these cities? And one of the things that's been a little bit surprising to me, I don't cover ICE. I don't cover parts of the DHS. I'm more focused on other law enforcement agencies. But in looking at this in its totality, when we talk about the interaction, to your question, between local policing, FBI, DHS, ICE, all the components here, you would not see a circumstance where the FBI in New York or its leaders, there would be a leak of somehow saying, today we're going to go after the mafia in New York and we're going to surge agents to these places. You would not see in other cities a local police department say, today we're going after all drug dealers or we're going to surge a presence for the next several weeks. Now, to be clear, it's not always that DHS is blasting out on social media, oh, we're coming to Minneapolis in the coming couple of days. But they have talked at different points about surging about it. It's information that has definitely gotten out to reporters as far as the amount of agents that are there. And today, the DHS secretary, in response to that question, says, look, we don't put out that type of information in advance, but then later said, or said at a different point in that press conference, that she reserves the right to send more agents and more officers from ICE to Minneapolis. So when you're conducting these types of law enforcement operations in the middle of the day, in broad daylight, it does make it easy for individuals to intercede, and it certainly ratchets up the temperature. So there are questions in law enforcement circles today as to whether or not DHS should reconsider and ICE should reconsider the way that they roll out these enforcement and removal operations. Should this be done more covertly? Should these operations be done in a manner or in a fashion where they're more targeted? Because when you see these types of scenarios where ICE is out in the community, is it safe for the ICE officers to be so blatant and out in the open? And then you create potential flashpoints, the likes of which we've seen yesterday. So it is definitely a question. Julia referenced the car stops that we've seen in other cities. You both have been talking about the enforcement and removal operations that could happen with schools. And so I think those are all questions that people have when you do law enforcement operations in the open like that. It does create the potential for issues with the public, and that obviously can lead to officer safety issues. It can lead to safety issues for the public. So I think that's something that remains watching here in the coming weeks and days after this incident in Minneapolis. Will there be a change in the way that ICE conducts these operations?
Tom Winter, thank you. Let me go back to Minneapolis here, where Stephen Romo is on the ground near the scene of that shooting. And Stephen, I know we're learning more about the woman who was killed here, 37-year-old Renee Good.
Yeah, we are, Hallie. We know that the Minneapolis City Council described Good as a resident who was caring for her neighbors when she was killed. Her mother actually also spoke to the Minnesota Star Tribune, Donna Ganger, and she called her daughter one of the kindest people I've ever known. Something that we heard from Governor Walz in that press conference was he said that Good's character has been decided by people who do not know her. I've heard that same sentiment echoed from people in Minneapolis today, saying that it didn't seem like she was an agitator. It didn't seem like she was doing anything aggressive. Of course, judging just by that video that we've seen of the tragic shooting that ended her life. But the summary judgment of who she was seems to be upsetting people on the ground here as well. Protesters behind me have gathered at the place where she was shot and killed yesterday. The outrage stirred from that killing now bleeding over, and it's also being aimed at ICE itself. Other protesters this morning have gathered at the location downtown, a federal building where it's acting as ICE headquarters here in Minneapolis, more or less right now, aiming that anger, that outrage directly at ICE. We heard the mayor telling them to get out of the city in very strong language yesterday, all because of the loss of this 37-year-old mom who was here in Minneapolis. And the picture that we're being presented by neighbors, by family members, and the one that we're hearing from federal authorities not matching up right now. And it is causing a lot more outrage, a lot more anger in the city, Hallie.
Stephen, thank you. Julia, let me go back to you, because as Stephen talks about the moment and the sort of tension and the feeling in Minneapolis right now, there's a question mark around a potential surge of more federal agents, specifically from Border Patrol. You have made note of the presence of Greg Bovino. Explain that and why that's relevant here to what could happen in Minneapolis in the hours ahead.
That's right. That was the first thing that I noticed at Kristi Noem's press conference last night. There was a man standing next to her with a crew haircut and dressed in the green Border Patrol uniform, and he's hard to miss. That's Greg Bovino. And you may have seen him in L.A. as tensions rose there over the summer. You may have seen him in Chicago. He was actually throwing tear gas canisters into a crowd of protesters. He was a little-known sector chief along the border in El Centro, California. Then he was basically promoted into this newly formed position known as commander of the Border Patrol. And now he goes around usually with a team about 250 Border Patrol agents, 2 different cities. They did Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte, most recently New Orleans. And some of these tactics that he uses have been brought with lawsuits. And so now he is commanding more than 100 Border Patrol in Minneapolis.
Julia Ainsley, thank you. Let me take you back to the White House here, where our White House correspondent Monica Alba is joining us. And Monica, we know that the vice president is going to be in the briefing room here, taking questions from reporters alongside the press secretary, right?
That's right, Hallie. And the vice president really has been weighing in on this shooting throughout the day. Today, he also offered some kind of opinion and analysis from his own assessment on this, which I think we can expect to hear him share from the podium. And he is responding to some online on social media who have been really calling out ICE, have been raising questions about the actions of this officer. And he is responding to them and some of the claims and questions that they're raising, saying that it's preposterous to assume anything other than what the White House position has been, which, again, I think you're going to hear elaborated on from the vice president and from the press secretary. And according to the vice president, he is saying that this woman in the vehicle did not wave the officers through. Again, there is an angle that shows this woman in the vehicle at some point waving a vehicle through, but he claims that she basically has no right to do so, even if that is what she was doing. Again, these are the vice president's own words, and that he argues she's waving another car through before the officers approach her car. So I think the vice president is going to be sharing a lot of his own, again, assessment on this. But the real question that we have, Hallie, is what he's basing that off of, if there's additional information that's been shared with the administration that hasn't been made public that we would all like to know.
Great point, Monica. Great questions all. Thank you very much. Our Kelly O'Donnell in the room and may have an opportunity to get questions to the vice president, to the press secretary. We are going to bring that to you live when it begins. There's been a bit of a delay, but for now, stick with us on NBC News for our continuing coverage right here and on NBCnews.com. I'm Hallie Jackson. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you soon.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.